Chapter 1. A New Life Begins. The Early Years in Prague and the Storm of War. Madeleine Albright was born in 1937 in a beautiful city called Prague. Prague is the capital of Czechoslovakia, a country in the heart of Europe. Madeleine's family lived a happy life. They had a lovely home. They laughed together and enjoyed meals around the table. Life was peaceful. But the peace didn't last. When Madeleine was only 2 years old, her world began to change. It was 1939. Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Czechoslovakia. The Nazi army took over the streets. Fear spread everywhere. People whispered about war. Families worried about what would happen next. Madeleine's father, Joseph Korbel, was a smart and brave man. He worked as a diplomat. His job was to help his country and solve problems between nations. But now it was too dangerous to stay in Prague. The Nazis were taking control. They were arresting people who spoke out against them. Joseph knew his family had to leave. They had no choice. Imagine packing everything you own into just a few bags. Imagine saying goodbye to your home, your friends, and your favorite places. This was what Madeleine's family had to do. It wasn't easy. Madeleine's parents were scared, but they stayed strong. They had to protect their children. They had to find safety. The family escaped to England. The journey was long and frightening. Trains were crowded. Roads were dangerous. They didn't know what would happen next. Madeleine was too young to understand everything, but she could feel the worry in her parents' voices. She held her mother's hand tightly, trying to feel safe. Finally, they arrived in England. It was a new country with a new language. Everything was different. The streets looked different. The food tasted different. Even the air smelled different. At first, Madeleine felt lost. She missed Prague. She missed her home. But there was no going back. England wasn't always welcoming to refugees. Some people didn't trust foreigners. Others didn't understand why families like Madeleine's were there. But the Korbels worked hard to build a new life. Joseph found a job. He continued to fight for Czechoslovakia's freedom, even from far away. Madeleine's mother took care of the family and kept them hopeful. During this time, the war grew worse. Bombs fell on cities across Europe. England wasn't safe from attacks. Air raid sirens would scream in the night. Families would run to shelters, hiding underground to stay safe. Madeleine would clutch her small blanket, trying to be brave. But it was terrifying. Every sound made her jump. Despite the fear, Madeleine's parents tried to give her a normal childhood. They read her stories and sang her songs. Her father told her about the world, about history and politics. He believed education was the most important thing. "You must always learn," he told her. "Knowledge is something no one can take from you." Madeleine loved listening to her father. His stories made her curious. She wanted to understand the world. Even as a little girl, she dreamed of big things. But life was still hard. The Korbel family didn't have much money. They wore old clothes and ate simple meals. Sometimes Madeleine felt out of place. She wondered if they would ever feel at home again. One day, her father sat her down. He explained why they had to leave Czechoslovakia. He told her about freedom and why it mattered. He told her about bravery and standing up for what is right. These lessons stayed with Madeleine. Even as a young girl, she started to see the importance of justice. By 1945, the war was ending. The Nazis were defeated, but the world was forever changed. Czechoslovakia was free again, and the Korbel family hoped to return. Madeleine's heart filled with excitement. She missed her homeland so much. But when they returned, things weren't the same. The Nazis were gone, but a new threat was rising: communism. A communist government had taken over Czechoslovakia. They didn't trust people like Josef Korbel. Once again, the family was in danger. Josef knew they had to leave. Again. Madeleine was heartbroken. She thought they were finally home, but now they had to start over. This time, they went to America. In 1948, they boarded a ship and crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Madeleine stood on the deck, watching the waves. She felt nervous, but also hopeful. America was the land of opportunity. Would this finally be their home? When they arrived, they settled in Denver, Colorado. Life in America was very different. The Korbels had to adapt once more. Joseph became a teacher, and Madeleine started school. She worked hard to learn English. At first, it was difficult. She struggled with the words and felt shy. But she didn't give up. Madeleine quickly grew to love reading. Books became her escape. She read stories about strong women and faraway lands. She also made new friends, slowly building a life in her new country. Even though she was young, she understood how much her parents had sacrificed. She wanted to make them proud. Her experiences as a refugee shaped her deeply. She knew what it meant to lose everything. She knew what it felt like to be scared and uncertain. But she also knew how to be brave. Her family had taught her that. "We are survivors," her mother would say. "We keep going." By the time Madeleine was a teenager, she had big dreams. She wanted to explore the world. She wanted to make a difference. Her early years had taught her about hardship, but they also taught her about hope. She carried those lessons with her, ready to face whatever came next. Madeleine's story was just beginning. Little did she know she would one day become one of the most important women in history. But for now, she was just a girl with a big heart and an even bigger dream, waiting to see what the future would bring. Chapter 2: A Refugee in America, Starting Over in the Land of Opportunity. The year was 1948. Madeleine Korbel was just 11 years old when she and her family boarded a ship to America. They were leaving everything behind, again. It wasn't the first time they had to start over. But this time, their journey felt different. The Korbels had heard stories about America. It was the land of freedom, a place where dreams could come true. But would it be their home? The ship ride across the Atlantic Ocean was long. Madeleine spent hours staring at the endless waves. Sometimes she imagined what life would be like in America. Would she make friends? Would people accept her family? Questions filled her mind, and her heart felt heavy with both hope and fear. Her parents reassured her. "We'll make it," her father, Joseph, said with a determined smile. "We always do." Finally, they arrived in New York City. The sight of the Statue of Liberty took Madeleine's breath away. The giant green statue seemed to whisper, "Welcome." But their journey wasn't over yet. From New York, the family traveled to Denver, Colorado, where Joseph had found a job teaching at the University of Denver. They had to build a life from scratch. Life in America was not easy at first. The Corbels didn't have much money. They lived in a small house with only a few belongings. Madeleine missed her old home, her friends, and even the sound of the Czech language. Everything in America felt big and new. The streets were wide. Cars sped by. People spoke quickly, using words Madeleine didn't understand. At school, things were even harder. Madeleine felt like an outsider. The other children spoke perfect English. They laughed and played together, but Madeleine didn't know how to join in. She struggled to keep up in class. Her teachers were kind, but she felt embarrassed when she didn't know the answers. Sometimes she wanted to cry, but instead she pushed herself to keep trying. Learning English became Madeleine's biggest challenge. She practiced every day, repeating words until they sounded right. She read books, even though they were hard to understand. Slowly, she began to improve. One day, her teacher gave her a gold star for a writing assignment. It was a small moment, but it meant everything to Madeleine. She realized she could succeed if she worked hard enough. At home, the Corbel family kept their traditions alive. Madeleine's mother cooked Czech meals and told stories from their homeland. Joseph, as always, shared his knowledge of history and politics. He often spoke about freedom and democracy. "America is a great country," he told Madeleine. "But you must always remember where you come from." Madeleine listened closely to her father. His words inspired her. She wanted to make him proud. Her father's lessons helped her understand that freedom was precious. She started to see how her family's struggles were part of a bigger story. They had left everything behind, but they had gained something important, a chance to live without fear. Despite the challenges, Madeleine found joy in her new life. She loved going to the library. Books became her escape. She could travel to faraway places without leaving her chair. She read about history, famous leaders, and strong women who changed the world. These stories fueled her dreams. She imagined herself making a difference one day. School became easier as Madeleine learned more English. Her hard work paid off. She made a few friends, children who were kind and curious about her background. She loved telling them about her homeland and sharing bits of the Czech language. Slowly, she began to feel like she belonged. But life wasn't only about school. Madeleine also helped her family. She took care of her younger siblings and helped with chores. Her parents worked hard, and she wanted to do her part. Even as a young girl, she understood the value of responsibility. She knew her family was counting on her. One day, her father sat her down for a serious conversation. He told her about the sacrifices they had made to come to America. He explained why they had to leave Czechoslovakia, not once, but twice. "Freedom is not free," he said. "We had to fight for it, and you must never take it for granted." These words stayed with Madeleine for the rest of her life. As Madeleine grew older, her confidence blossomed. She began to shine in her studies, especially in history and writing. Her teachers noticed her determination and encouraged her to aim high. Madeleine started to dream about going to college, something that seemed almost impossible for a young refugee girl. But she believed in herself, and her family believed in her too. Even though the Corbels faced struggles, they never gave up hope. Joseph's job as a professor provided some stability. Madeleine watched her father with admiration. He was so passionate about his work, so dedicated to teaching others. He became her role model. She wanted to be like him, knowledgeable, courageous, and kind. By the time Madeleine was a teenager, she felt at home in America. But she never forgot her roots. Her experiences as a refugee shaped her deeply. She knew what it meant to feel different, to feel uncertain about the future. These feelings gave her a deep sense of empathy. She cared about people who were struggling, just as her family had struggled. Madeleine also began to understand the power of perseverance. Every challenge she faced made her stronger. Every time she stumbled, she got back up. These lessons prepared her for the challenges she would face in the future. America had given the Corbels a fresh start, but their journey was far from over. Madeleine was just beginning to discover her potential. Her love for learning and her determination to succeed would guide her in the years to come. Little did she know, her story would one day inspire millions. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, Madeleine often sat by the window, thinking about the future. She dreamed of traveling the world, of making a difference. She didn't know how it would happen, but she knew she had to try. Her heart was filled with hope and the courage to keep going. Chapter 3. The Seeds of a Diplomat. From college to the world stage. When Madeleine Corbel arrived at Wellesley College, she was 18 years old. It was 1955. Wellesley was one of the best women's colleges in the United States. Only the brightest and most determined students studied there. Madeleine was excited, but nervous. She wondered, do I really belong here? Her parents encouraged her. Joseph Corbel, her father, always said, "Education is the key to everything." He believed in her. He told her to work hard, to ask questions, and to never give up. Madeleine carried those words in her heart as she walked through the grand gates of Wellesley for the first time. Life at college was very different from high school. The classes were harder, and the students were ambitious. Madeleine loved it. She had always been curious about the world. Now she could learn about politics, history, and diplomacy. These were her favorite subjects. She wanted to understand how countries worked together and why they sometimes didn't. Madeleine worked tirelessly. She read books, wrote papers, and participated in debates. But she wasn't just a serious student. She also made friends who supported her and made her laugh. They spent hours talking in the dormitories, sharing dreams for the future. Madeleine dreamed of making a difference in the world. Her friends believed she could do it. One professor noticed Madeleine's talent right away. "You have a sharp mind," he told her. "You ask the right questions." This encouragement gave her confidence. She wasn't just another student. She was someone who could think deeply about problems and find solutions. This skill would become her greatest strength. But life at Wellesley wasn't all easy. Madeleine faced challenges too. For one, she still felt different. Many of the students at Wellesley came from wealthy families. Madeleine did not. Her parents had sacrificed so much to give her this chance. She often felt pressure to succeed, not just for herself, but for them. Sometimes she missed her family deeply. She wrote letters home every week, telling her parents about her studies and her new life. In her letters, she promised to do her best. She wanted them to be proud. Madeleine also faced another challenge: being a woman in a male-dominated field. In the 1950s, politics was not a common subject for young women to study. Some people thought women didn't belong in government or international relations. But Madeleine disagreed. She believed women could do anything men could do, and sometimes they could do it better. Her determination grew stronger. She decided to focus on international relations. She was fascinated by the idea of diplomacy, solving conflicts between countries through discussion and negotiation. She thought about her own family's journey. Her father's work as a diplomat had inspired her. She wanted to follow in his footsteps, but in her own way. One of Madeleine's most memorable moments at Wellesley came during a history class. The professor asked, "What would you do to prevent a war?" The room was silent. Then Madeleine raised her hand. She spoke clearly and confidently. She explained how leaders could use dialogue and compromise to avoid violence. The professor nodded. "You're thinking like a diplomat," he said. These words stayed with her. Madeleine realized she had a gift for understanding people and solving problems. She knew she was on the right path. But college wasn't just about classes and essays. Madeleine also learned important life lessons. She learned how to balance hard work with friendship and fun. She joined student organizations, attended events, and even went on dates. She loved the energy of campus life. It was a time of growth and discovery. One of her favorite activities was attending guest lectures. Wellesley invited many famous speakers to talk about global issues. Madeleine listened intently, taking notes and imagining herself in their place. She dreamed of one day standing on a stage, sharing her own ideas with the world. Her classmates admired her passion. "Madeleine is unstoppable," one friend said. "When she sets her mind to something, she makes it happen." This determination would serve her well in the years to come. As Madeleine approached graduation, she started to think about her future. What would she do next? The world was changing rapidly. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was creating tension around the globe. Madeleine wanted to be part of the solution. She wanted to help build peace. But her path was not yet clear. Should she continue her studies? Should she look for a job? Should she follow her passion for diplomacy? These questions filled her mind as she prepared for the next chapter of her life. Graduation day arrived. Madeleine stood proudly in her cap and gown. As she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she felt a mix of emotions. She was proud of what she had achieved, but she was also nervous about what lay ahead. Her father was there to celebrate with her. He hugged her tightly and said, "This is just the beginning." Madeleine smiled. She knew he was right. Wellesley had given Madeleine the tools she needed to succeed. She had gained knowledge, confidence, and a sense of purpose. She was ready to take on the world. But life after college would not be easy. The road ahead was full of challenges and surprises. Madeleine would face obstacles she could never have imagined, but she would also discover her own strength and her ability to make a difference. Looking back, Madeleine often said that her time at Wellesley shaped her future. It was there that she planted the seeds of her career in diplomacy. It was there that she realized the power of education and the importance of perseverance. And it was there that she learned to dream big, no matter what others said. The seeds of a diplomat had been planted. Now they were ready to grow. What would Madeleine's next steps be? Where would her dreams take her? The journey was just beginning, and it would be extraordinary. Chapter 4. A Woman in a Changing World. Love, marriage, and the challenges of a diplomat's wife. Madeleine Corbel was a young woman with big dreams. She loved studying politics and international relations. She wanted to make a difference in the world. But in the 1950s, women were expected to follow a different path. Society had rules. Women were often told to focus on marriage, family, and home. Madeleine wanted all of it: a career, a family, and a meaningful life. But how could she do it? At Wellesley College, Madeleine met a man named Joseph Albright. Joseph was smart and confident. He came from a wealthy family, and he was full of charm. The two fell in love. They talked for hours about the future. They dreamed about traveling the world together. In 1959, Madeleine and Joseph got married. She was 22 years old. It was the start of a new chapter. Life as Joseph's wife was exciting at first. His job as a journalist often took them to interesting places. They traveled and met people from all walks of life. But it wasn't always easy. Madeleine soon realized that being a diplomat's wife came with challenges. Expectations were high. She had to host dinners, entertain guests, and look perfect. These tasks were important, but they weren't what she had dreamed of doing. She missed her studies. She missed having her own voice. Things became even more complicated when Madeleine became a mother. She and Joseph had 3 daughters, Anne, Alice, and Katie. Being a mother brought Madeleine great joy, but it was also exhausting. The children needed her all the time. She loved them deeply, but she also missed the world outside her home. Madeleine often wondered, can I do more? Is it possible to be a good mother and have a career? The 1960s were a time of change. Around the world, women were beginning to demand more rights. They wanted to work. They wanted to be treated as equals. Madeleine felt inspired by this movement. She loved her family, but she also wanted to make a difference in the world. She believed she could do both, but it wouldn't be easy. Madeleine decided to go back to school. She enrolled in Georgetown University to study international relations. It was hard work. During the day, she cared for her daughters. She cooked meals, helped with homework, and played games with them. Then, when the house was quiet, she opened her books. She stayed up late, studying for exams and writing papers. Some nights, she felt so tired that she wanted to give up. But she didn't. Her professors at Georgetown saw her potential. They praised her hard work and sharp mind. Madeleine began to feel like herself again. She loved discussing politics and world affairs. She was good at it. But even as she excelled in school, balancing her roles was tough. Sometimes she missed family dinners because of classes. Sometimes she stayed awake all night, worrying if she was doing enough for her children. Joseph was supportive, but his career kept him busy. He traveled often, leaving Madeleine to manage things at home. There were moments of tension. Madeleine wanted to follow her dreams, but she didn't want to let her family down. It was a balancing act. A constant push and pull. In time, Madeleine found her rhythm. She learned to plan carefully. She scheduled her classes around her daughter's needs. She found time to study while they napped or played. Slowly, she began to see that it was possible to be both a loving mother and a successful student. After finishing her studies, Madeleine took her first steps into the professional world. She worked on political campaigns, helping candidates understand foreign policy. Her knowledge and skills impressed everyone she worked with. But even as her career began to grow, she never stopped being a devoted mother. She made sure to be there for her daughters when they needed her most. There were sacrifices, of course. Madeleine couldn't always attend every school event or family gathering. Sometimes she felt guilty. She worried if she was doing the right thing. But she believed in setting an example for her daughters. She wanted them to see that women could achieve great things. She wanted them to know that their dreams mattered too. As the years went by, Madeleine's hard work began to pay off. She was invited to join important organizations and advise on global issues. People started to recognize her talents. They admired her ability to solve problems and connect with others. Even in a world dominated by men, Madeleine's voice stood out. Her marriage, however, faced challenges. Joseph's career kept him away for long periods. Their lives grew busier and more separate. By the 1980s, the couple decided to part ways. It was a painful time for Madeleine, but she didn't let it stop her. Instead, she used it as a chance to focus even more on her career and her daughters. Madeleine's experience as a wife, mother, and student shaped her deeply. It taught her resilience. It taught her to juggle many roles at once. Most importantly, it taught her that women didn't have to choose between family and career. They could find a way to have both, if they were determined enough. Through all the challenges, Madeleine stayed true to herself. She loved her daughters fiercely. She worked hard to give them a stable and loving home. At the same time, she never stopped reaching for her dreams. Her journey was not easy, but it was inspiring. Madeleine's story is a reminder that life is full of choices. Sometimes those choices are difficult, but with courage and determination, it's possible to create the life you want. Madeleine proved that a woman could be many things: a wife, a mother, and a leader. Her story continues to inspire women around the world to this day. And for Madeleine, the best was yet to come. Chapter 5. Climbing the Ladder. Breaking Barriers in Washington. After finishing her studies at Georgetown University, Madeleine Albright was ready to begin her career. She was full of energy and determination, but starting out in Washington, D.C. was not easy. It was a city full of powerful people, mostly men, who made the important decisions. Madeleine had to work hard to find her place and prove that she belonged. Her first job was as a staff member for a U.S. senator. She didn't have a fancy office or important title. At first, her tasks were small: writing notes, organizing schedules, and doing research, but Madeleine didn't mind. She knew that every job, no matter how small, was a chance to learn. She paid attention to everything around her. She watched how decisions were made and how leaders handled tough situations. She was like a sponge, absorbing as much knowledge as she could. Madeleine quickly gained a reputation for being smart and reliable. People noticed her. She worked long hours, often staying late into the night. She wasn't afraid to ask questions or share her ideas. Her dedication and confidence began to open doors. Slowly but surely, Madeleine was climbing the ladder. One of her big breaks came when she started working for Edmund Muskie, a respected senator and later the U.S. Secretary of State. Muskie was impressed by Madeleine's sharp mind and hard work. He gave her more responsibilities, asking for her advice on important issues. Madeleine loved this work. She felt that she was finally making a difference. But it wasn't always easy. Washington in the 1970s was a world dominated by men. There were very few women in positions of power. Sometimes Madeleine felt like she didn't belong. She was ignored in meetings or underestimated because of her gender. But she didn't let that stop her. Instead, she used it as motivation to work even harder. I am just as capable as anyone else, Madeleine told herself. And she proved it. She made her voice heard in a room full of powerful men. She was careful, though, always respectful but firm. Slowly, people began to listen. They started to respect her for her knowledge and ability to solve problems. By the 1980s, Madeleine had built a strong reputation. She began teaching at Georgetown University, sharing her knowledge with students who admired her determination. At the same time, she worked with political campaigns, helping candidates with foreign policy. Her expertise was in demand, and her network of connections grew. One of her proudest moments came when she joined President Jimmy Carter's National Security Council. It was a huge step forward in her career. In this role, she advised the government on international issues. She studied complex problems, from Cold War tensions to conflicts in the Middle East. It was challenging work, but Madeleine thrived. She loved the fast-paced environment and the chance to make real change. Still, the challenges didn't disappear. Madeleine often felt the weight of being one of the few women in leadership roles. She knew that every mistake she made would be judged more harshly than those of her male colleagues. I have to be twice as good, she thought. And she was. Madeleine's ability to connect with people set her apart. She was not only smart, but also empathetic. She understood the importance of listening. Whether she was talking to a president or a fellow staff member, she made people feel valued. This skill helped her build strong relationships and gain the trust of those around her. One day, Madeleine received a surprising call. It was from Zbigniew Brzezinski, the National Security Advisor. He asked Madeleine to help him with his work. This was a huge honor. Brzezinski was one of the most powerful men in Washington, and he saw potential in Madeleine. She took the opportunity and didn't disappoint. She worked tirelessly, proving once again that she could handle even the toughest assignments. During this time, Madeleine began to think more deeply about the role of women in government. She saw how hard it was for women to advance in Washington. She also saw how few women were involved in important decisions. This troubled her. She believed that women's voices were essential. They brought unique perspectives and ideas to the table. Madeleine decided she would not only succeed for herself, but also pave the way for other women. Her determination paid off. By the late 1980s, Madeleine was one of the most respected experts in foreign policy. She was invited to speak at conferences and write articles about global issues. People listened to her ideas. Her dream of making a difference was becoming a reality. But Madeleine's journey wasn't just about professional success. She faced personal challenges as well. Her marriage to Joseph Albright ended during this period, leaving her as a single mother to her 3 daughters. It was a difficult time, but Madeleine refused to give up. She balanced her career and family life with grace and strength. I can't stop now, she often told herself. She knew she had worked too hard to let anything stand in her way. Her daughters admired her resilience and determination. Madeleine became a role model, not just for them, but for women everywhere. By the time the 1990s arrived, Madeleine's career was reaching new heights. She joined important organizations and became a trusted advisor to top political leaders. Her rise in Washington was remarkable. She had gone from being a quiet staff member to a powerful voice in international politics. Madeleine's story of climbing the ladder is one of grit, intelligence, and persistence. She faced barriers that could have stopped her. But she never let those barriers define her. She kept pushing forward, proving that with hard work and courage, anything is possible. This chapter in Madeleine's life is not just about her achievements. It's about the lessons she learned along the way. She learned that success is not handed to you. You have to earn it. She learned that being underestimated can be an advantage if you use it to fuel your determination. Most importantly, she learned that lifting others up is just as important as climbing to the top. For Madeleine, the ladder she climbed was not just a personal journey. It was a chance to break barriers and open doors for others. And she was only getting started. The next step in her incredible journey would take her to the global stage as a leader who would change the world. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on Woo English. Remember, this content is specially made for Woo English listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of Woo English's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. Facing the Cold War. Advising the nation during tense times. The 1980s were a time of fear and uncertainty. The world was divided into two powerful camps, the United States and the Soviet Union. This period was called the Cold War. It wasn't a war with guns and bombs. It was a war of ideas, politics, and influence. Both sides wanted to be the most powerful. Both sides distrusted each other deeply. People lived in constant fear of nuclear war. In this tense and dangerous time, Madeleine Albright began her most important work. By now, she was an expert in international relations. She had studied hard and worked with smart and powerful people. But now, she was stepping into a role that could shape the future of the world. Madeleine became a trusted advisor on U.S.-Soviet relations. Her job was to help the U.S. government understand the Soviet Union. She studied their leaders, their plans, and their goals. She explained what was happening behind the Iron Curtain, the invisible wall that separated the East from the West. It was a huge responsibility, but Madeleine was ready. Her work wasn't easy. The Soviet Union was a secretive and closed society. They didn't share information. They didn't trust outsiders. But Madeleine had a gift for understanding people. She could see patterns in their behavior. She could predict what they might do next. Her advice became essential to the leaders she worked with. At the time, President Ronald Reagan was in office. His administration was determined to stand strong against the Soviet Union. They believed in peace, but they also believed in being prepared for conflict. Madeleine played a key role in helping shape this strategy. She gave clear and thoughtful advice. She asked the tough questions. She didn't back down, even when the room was full of powerful men. Madeleine's voice stood out. She had a sharp mind and a calm presence. Even in heated discussions, she kept her focus. People listened to her because she spoke with confidence and intelligence. But being a woman in such a high-stakes environment wasn't always easy. She had to work twice as hard to earn respect. Some people doubted her at first, but she proved them wrong with her dedication and skill. One of Madeleine's most important tasks was understanding Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev was unlike the Soviet leaders before him. He wanted to reform his country. He wanted to end the arms race, the competition between the U.S. and the Soviet Union to build more and more nuclear weapons. Madeleine carefully studied his speeches and actions. She saw an opportunity for change. In 1985, Gorbachev introduced two important policies: glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. Glasnost allowed more freedom of speech and information. Perestroika aimed to reform the Soviet economy. These changes were bold and risky. Many people doubted they would work. But Madeleine saw them as a chance for peace. She shared her insights with U.S. leaders. She explained why Gorbachev's reforms were important. She helped them understand that this was a moment to act. Her advice helped shape U.S. policy during this critical time. The Cold War had lasted for decades. Now, there was a small, fragile chance to end it. Madeleine's work often required long hours and intense focus. She read countless reports. She attended endless meetings. She traveled to conferences and summits. Each day brought new challenges. But she never lost sight of the goal, a safer, more peaceful world. One of her most memorable moments came in 1987, when President Reagan and Gorbachev signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF Treaty. This agreement was historic. Both sides agreed to reduce their nuclear weapons. For the first time, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were moving closer to peace. Madeleine watched with pride. She knew that years of hard work had led to this moment. But the Cold War wasn't over yet. There were still tensions and risks. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. This wall had separated East and West Berlin for nearly 30 years. Its fall symbolized the beginning of the end of the Cold War. Madeleine felt hope rising. The world was changing, and she had played a part in that change. Throughout her work during the Cold War, Madeleine learned important lessons. She learned that diplomacy requires patience. Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes years of effort, conversation, and trust building. She also learned the importance of courage. Speaking the truth isn't always easy, especially when the stakes are so high. But Madeleine never let fear silence her. She also realized the power of understanding different cultures. The U.S. and the Soviet Union were so different, but Madeleine believed that finding common ground was possible. She showed others how to listen, learn, and build bridges. These skills would guide her throughout her career. By the end of the 1980s, the Cold War was fading. The Soviet Union was collapsing. Countries in Eastern Europe were gaining their independence. It was a time of hope and uncertainty. But one thing was clear. The world had changed forever. Madeleine's role during the Cold War shaped her future. She had proven that she could handle the toughest challenges. She had shown that she was a leader. Her journey was far from over. In the years to come, she would continue to rise. But her work during this time laid the foundation for her incredible career. Madeleine's story reminds us that even in the darkest times, there is always hope. With hard work, intelligence, and courage, it is possible to make a difference. She believed in the power of diplomacy to solve problems and bring people together. Her work during the Cold War is a testament to that belief. Chapter 7. The Breakthrough. Becoming U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. In 1993, Madeleine Albright's life changed forever. President Bill Clinton had been elected, and his administration needed strong leaders. Madeleine, with her sharp mind and years of experience, was one of them. She was chosen as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. It was a historic moment. Madeleine was about to step onto the global stage. The United Nations, UN, is a place where leaders from countries all over the world meet. They discuss important issues like peace, security, and human rights. It's a place of big ideas and tough decisions. Being the U.S. ambassador meant representing the United States in these conversations. It was a huge responsibility. Madeleine felt both excited and nervous. When she first walked into the UN headquarters in New York, she felt the weight of history. The tall, glass building seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. Inside, people from every corner of the world rushed through the halls. She heard dozens of languages being spoken. It was a place filled with energy, challenges, and hope. As she took her seat in the General Assembly, Madeleine looked around the room. Delegates from nearly 200 countries were gathered. Each person carried the hopes of their nation. She realized how important her role was. She would have to listen, negotiate, and speak up for what was right. She promised herself, "I will not waste this opportunity." But being the U.S. ambassador wasn't easy. Some countries didn't trust the United States. Others had their own interests and agendas. The debates were often heated. Voices were raised, arguments were sharp, and tensions were high. But Madeleine was ready. She had spent years preparing for this moment. Madeleine's first big challenge came quickly. In 1994, a terrible genocide began in Rwanda, a small country in Africa. Hundreds of thousands of people were being killed. The world was shocked, but the UN couldn't agree on what to do. Countries debated, but action came too slowly. Madeleine watched in horror as the tragedy unfolded. The experience deeply affected her. She later admitted that the UN and the world had failed Rwanda. It was a painful lesson. From then on, Madeleine was determined to act faster and speak louder when faced with injustice. She would not let silence lead to more suffering. Madeleine's style at the UN was bold and direct. She didn't hesitate to speak her mind. When she saw something wrong, she called it out. Some people admired her courage. Others thought she was too outspoken. But Madeleine didn't care. She believed in standing up for what was right. One of her most memorable moments came during a debate about Iraq. The Iraqi leader, Saddam Hussein, was ignoring UN resolutions. He refused to let inspectors check for illegal weapons. Madeleine spoke firmly. She reminded the world that rules must be followed. Her words were clear and powerful. We cannot allow dictators to break the rules without consequences. Her speeches often inspired others. She had a way of making complicated ideas simple and clear. She knew how to connect with people. She didn't just represent the U.S. She represented the values of democracy, justice, and human rights. Madeleine also focused on women's rights. She believed that empowering women was essential for creating peace. At the UN, she often spoke about the importance of including women in decision-making. She met with women leaders from around the world and encouraged them to keep fighting for equality. But being a woman in such a high position wasn't always easy. Madeleine faced criticism and doubt, especially from those who thought women didn't belong in leadership roles. She ignored the negativity and worked even harder. Her success proved that women could lead at the highest levels. Madeleine's days were long and demanding. She attended meetings, wrote speeches, and negotiated with other leaders. She often worked late into the night. But she loved the challenge. She felt she was making a difference, one decision at a time. Her work wasn't just about diplomacy. It was also about understanding people. Madeleine spent time learning about other cultures and traditions. She listened carefully to the concerns of other countries. She believed that diplomacy wasn't just about talking. It was about building trust and finding common ground. In 1995, Madeleine played a key role in organizing the UN Conference on Women in Beijing, China. It was one of the largest gatherings of women leaders in history. Thousands of women from all over the world came together to discuss equality, education, and opportunity. Madeleine's voice was strong and inspiring. She reminded everyone that women's rights are human rights. The conference was a success, and it pushed the global conversation on women's rights forward. One of Madeleine's proudest moments at the UN came when the United States was able to broker peace agreements in several conflicts. Whether it was in the Balkans, Haiti, or Africa, Madeleine's work helped save lives. She believed that peace was always worth fighting for. By the end of her time as UN ambassador, Madeleine had proven herself to the world. She was no longer just an advisor or a negotiator. She was a leader. Her work at the UN laid the foundation for what was to come next. In 1997, Madeleine received a phone call that would change her life again. President Clinton wanted her to serve as the U.S. Secretary of State. She would become the first woman in history to hold that position. It was a moment of triumph. Madeleine had broken through every barrier. She had shown the world what was possible. Looking back, Madeleine's time at the UN was full of challenges and triumphs. She had faced difficult situations and made tough decisions. But through it all, she stayed true to her values. She believed in the power of diplomacy to create a better world, and she never gave up. Madeleine's journey to the UN was a testament to her strength and determination. She had come a long way from her days as a refugee. Now, she was shaping the future of the world. Her story continues to inspire people everywhere, reminding us that one person can make a difference. The stage was set for Madeleine's next chapter. The world was watching, and she was ready. Chapter 8. The Glass Ceiling Shatters. The first female Secretary of State. It was 1997, and history was about to be made. Madeleine Albright stood in the White House, feeling a mix of excitement and disbelief. President Bill Clinton had just asked her to become the U.S. Secretary of State. It was the highest position in American foreign policy, a role that had never been held by a woman before. This was a moment that Madeleine had worked for her entire life. Her heart raced as she thought about what it meant. She wasn't just breaking a barrier for herself, she was opening a door for all women. She knew this moment would inspire others, just as she had been inspired by strong women in her own life. "Yes," she said with a smile. "I would be honored." When the news became public, the world reacted with excitement. Newspapers wrote headlines like, "First Woman Secretary of State." People cheered for this historic moment. Madeleine received hundreds of letters from women and girls. Many of them said the same thing. "Because of you, I believe I can do anything." But not everyone was supportive. Some critics questioned whether a woman could handle such an important role. Others doubted her ability to deal with world leaders, especially those from countries where women were not seen as equals. Madeleine knew she had to prove herself, not just for her own reputation, but for all women who dreamed of leadership. On January 23, 1997, Madeleine Albright was sworn in as Secretary of State. She stood in front of her family, friends, and colleagues, placing her hand on a Bible. As she took the oath, she felt a deep sense of pride. This was not just her achievement. It was the result of years of hard work, sacrifice, and courage. It was the culmination of a journey that began with her family fleeing Czechoslovakia as refugees. Her first days on the job were thrilling, but overwhelming. The State Department was a massive operation. Thousands of people worked there, managing relationships with nearly every country in the world. Madeleine was now their leader. Her job was to guide U.S. foreign policy, solve global problems, and represent the United States on the world stage. She dove into her work with energy and determination. Her first big challenge was meeting with world leaders. Many of them were men who had never worked with a female Secretary of State. Some were skeptical. Others underestimated her. But Madeleine didn't let this stop her. She used her intelligence, wit, and charm to win their respect. One famous moment happened during a meeting with Russian officials. They tried to test her, assuming she wouldn't be tough enough. But Madeleine stood her ground. She delivered her arguments with confidence, showing that she wasn't afraid to push back. By the end of the meeting, even her critics were impressed. They realized that she was a force to be reckoned with. Madeleine also had a unique way of expressing herself. She loved wearing pins on her jackets, small pieces of jewelry that sent subtle messages. If she was in a tough negotiation, she might wear a pin shaped like a snake to show she wouldn't back down. If she wanted to inspire hope, she might wear a pin with a dove, a symbol of peace. These pins became her trademark. People around the world began to notice them, and they added a touch of personality to her diplomatic work. As Secretary of State, Madeleine focused on some of the world's most urgent issues. She worked to strengthen NATO, the alliance between the U.S. and Europe. She supported efforts to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. She also fought to promote democracy in countries that were struggling with dictatorship. Her days were long, filled with meetings, speeches, and travel. But she loved every moment. One of her most challenging missions was in the Balkans, a region in Europe torn apart by war. In the 1990s, ethnic conflicts in places like Bosnia and Kosovo led to terrible violence. Madeleine knew the U.S. had to act. She pushed for military intervention to stop the killing and protect innocent people. Her leadership during this time saved lives and helped bring peace to the region. But the job wasn't always victories and celebrations. There were moments of frustration and heartbreak. Negotiations sometimes failed. Peace agreements sometimes fell apart. Madeleine felt the weight of these failures deeply. She often stayed awake at night, thinking about what more she could have done. But she never gave up. She believed in the power of diplomacy to make the world better. Madeleine's role as Secretary of State also came with personal sacrifices. The job required constant travel. She spent weeks at a time away from her family. She missed birthdays, holidays, and quiet dinners at home. But her daughters understood how important her work was. They were proud of their mother and supported her every step of the way. Throughout her time in office, Madeleine remained deeply committed to women's rights. She spoke often about the need to include women in politics, business, and peace-building efforts. She met with women leaders in every country she visited, encouraging them to raise their voices and fight for equality. She wanted her story to show them what was possible. One of Madeleine's favorite sayings was, "There's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women." She believed strongly in lifting others up. Her own success was built on the support of mentors and friends. Now, it was her turn to inspire the next generation. By the end of her term in 2001, Madeleine had earned respect around the world. She had proven that a woman could lead on the global stage. She had broken barriers, tackled difficult challenges, and left a lasting impact on U.S. foreign policy. When she stepped down, she did so with pride. She had paved the way for others to follow. Reflecting on her time as Secretary of State, Madeleine often said, "It wasn't just about me. It was about opening doors for others. She understood that her role was bigger than one person. It was about showing the world that leadership has no gender. It's about strength, courage, and vision. Madeleine's appointment as Secretary of State shattered the glass ceiling. It proved that women could rise to the highest levels of power. Her story continues to inspire people around the world, especially young girls dreaming of leadership. For Madeleine, this chapter was not the end. It was a milestone in a lifetime of service. She was ready to take on new challenges and continue her journey. The best was yet to come. Chapter 9. Leading through conflict. Tough decisions in Kosovo and beyond. In the late 1990s, violence erupted in a small region of Europe called Kosovo. This was part of Yugoslavia, a country already broken by years of war. The conflict in Kosovo was brutal. Ethnic Albanians and Serbs were fighting for control. Villages were burned. Families were torn apart. Thousands of people fled their homes. It was a crisis the world could not ignore. Madeleine Albright, as the U.S. Secretary of State, faced one of the biggest challenges of her career. She had seen the horrors of war before. She remembered the failures in Rwanda, where the world acted too late. This time, she was determined to make a difference. The leader of Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic, was at the center of the violence. He ruled with fear and brutality. He wanted to drive ethnic Albanians out of Kosovo. It was ethnic cleansing, a terrible crime. Madeleine knew that something had to be done to stop him. She started by using diplomacy. Madeleine traveled to Europe and met with leaders from around the world. She worked to convince them that action was needed. She also spoke directly to Milosevic. She told him to stop the violence. She warned him of the consequences if he didn't. But Milosevic refused to listen. For months, Madeleine and her team worked tirelessly. They tried to negotiate a peaceful solution. They held meetings, sent messages, and pushed for agreements. But every time they made progress, Milosevic backed away. The violence continued. Refugees poured into neighboring countries. The images of their suffering were heartbreaking. Finally, Madeleine knew that words were not enough. She turned to NATO, a powerful alliance of countries, for help. NATO had the strength to stop Milosevic, but convincing all the members to act was not easy. Some leaders worried about the risks. Others thought the conflict was too far away to get involved. Madeleine had to use all her skills to build support. She spoke passionately about the need to protect innocent people. She reminded leaders of their shared responsibility to uphold human rights. Slowly, her words began to make a difference. NATO agreed to take action. In March 1999, NATO launched airstrikes against Serbian forces. It was a bold and dangerous move. Madeleine knew it would not be easy. War is always risky, but she believed it was the only way to stop the violence. For 78 days, the airstrikes continued. It was a tense and emotional time. Every day brought new challenges. During this period, Madeleine worked tirelessly. She held meetings with NATO leaders. She answered questions from reporters. She monitored the situation closely. She felt the weight of every decision. People's lives depended on the choices she made. The pressure was enormous, but Madeleine stayed focused. At the same time, she never forgot the human side of the conflict. She met with refugees who had lost everything. She listened to their stories of pain and survival. She saw the tears of mothers who didn't know if their children were alive. These moments reminded her why she was fighting so hard. They gave her the strength to keep going. Finally, in June 1999, Milosevic surrendered. Serbian forces withdrew from Kosovo. The violence stopped. Refugees began to return home. It was a moment of relief and hope. Madeleine had helped bring peace to a region torn apart by war. But the end of the fighting didn't mean the end of the work. Kosovo was in ruins. Villages were destroyed. Families were broken. Rebuilding would take years. Madeleine continued to push for international support. She wanted to make sure that Kosovo had a chance to recover. The Kosovo crisis showed the world what kind of leader Madeleine was. She was tough when she needed to be. She didn't back down in the face of resistance, but she was also compassionate. She cared deeply about the people affected by the conflict. She believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. The Kosovo War wasn't the only challenge Madeleine faced as Secretary of State. Around the world, there were other crises. In Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo was torn apart by violence. In the Middle East, tensions between Israelis and Palestinians remained high. Madeleine worked tirelessly to address these issues. She traveled to meet leaders, encouraged peace talks, and supported efforts to bring stability. One of her biggest strengths was her ability to connect with people. Madeleine believed that diplomacy was about more than just politics. It was about understanding different cultures and building trust. She listened carefully to the concerns of others. She respected their perspectives, even when she didn't agree. Her work wasn't always successful. Some conflicts were too deep and complex to solve quickly, but Madeleine never gave up. She believed that every step toward peace was worth taking. As Secretary of State, Madeleine also focused on preventing future conflicts. She worked to strengthen alliances and build partnerships. She believed that countries could achieve more by working together. She often said, "Diplomacy is not about giving up. It's about finding solutions." Looking back, Madeleine saw the Kosovo crisis as one of the most important moments of her career. It tested her leadership. It pushed her to make tough decisions. But it also showed her what was possible when people stand up for what is right. Her actions during this time inspired many. She showed the world that compassion and courage could go hand in hand. She proved that diplomacy could save lives. And she reminded everyone that even in the darkest times, hope could prevail. Madeleine's leadership during the Kosovo crisis left a lasting legacy. She didn't just change the course of one conflict. She showed the world what true leadership looked like. and she inspired a new generation to believe in the power of diplomacy. For Madeleine, the work was never about power or fame. It was about making a difference. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And in Kosovo, she did just that. Her courage and determination will never be forgotten. Chapter 10. A Voice for Women. Inspiring a New Generation. Madeleine Albright knew what it felt like to be underestimated. As a young woman, she had faced challenges simply because of her gender. She was told that leadership was not for women. She was told to stay quiet, to wait her turn. But Madeleine refused to believe these things. She worked hard. She proved people wrong. And she became the first female U.S. Secretary of State. Once she had reached the top, Madeleine had a new mission. She wanted to make sure no woman ever felt limited by her gender again. She used her position to inspire and empower women around the world. She became a voice for equality, justice, and opportunity. One of Madeleine's most famous lines was, "There's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women." She said it with a smile, but she meant it. She believed that women needed to support each other. Whether it was in politics, business, or any other field, women could achieve more if they worked together. Madeleine's story inspired women everywhere. She showed them that they could break barriers. She showed them that they could lead. But she didn't stop there. She also worked to create real change. She wanted to make the world fairer and more just for women and girls. One of the ways Madeleine did this was by speaking at international summits. She traveled to conferences where leaders from all over the world gathered. At these events, Madeleine often talked about women's rights. She spoke about the importance of education for girls. She reminded everyone that when women succeed, families and communities succeed too. At a famous summit in Beijing in 1995, Madeleine delivered a powerful speech. She said, "Women's rights are human rights." These words echoed around the world. They became a rallying cry for the fight for equality. Madeleine's speech inspired thousands of women to stand up for their rights. It also pushed governments to take action. But Madeleine didn't just focus on big speeches. She also believed in personal connections. She spent time mentoring young women. She met with students, activists, and young leaders. She listened to their stories and gave them advice. Many of these women said Madeleine changed their lives. She made them believe in themselves. She made them feel that they could achieve anything. One young woman who met Madeleine said, "She made me feel seen. She made me feel powerful." Stories like these show the impact Madeleine had. She didn't just talk about change, she made it happen. Madeleine also worked to include women in important discussions. She believed that women needed a seat at the table. In many parts of the world, women were excluded from politics and decision-making. Madeleine thought this was wrong. She pushed for more women to be included in leadership roles. She encouraged them to run for office, to speak up, and to lead. Her efforts began to pay off. Over time, more women entered politics and government. Many of them looked up to Madeleine as a role model. They admired her courage, her intelligence, and her determination. She showed them that leadership was possible, even in a world dominated by men. One of Madeleine's proudest achievements was helping to create the International Women's Leadership Initiative. This program brought women leaders together from around the globe. They shared ideas, supported each other, and worked on solving problems in their communities. Madeleine loved this program because it focused on action. It gave women the tools they needed to create real change. Even after she left her role as Secretary of State, Madeleine continued her work. She wrote books, gave lectures, and traveled to meet with women's groups. Her books shared her wisdom and experience. In one of them, Madam Secretary, she talked about her journey as a woman in politics. She hoped her story would inspire others to follow in her footsteps. Madeleine often told women, "You are smarter and stronger than you think." She believed in the power of confidence. She wanted women to trust their abilities and to know their worth. For her, this wasn't just a message. It was a mission. Her efforts weren't always easy. There were people who didn't agree with her. There were people who thought women's rights weren't important. But Madeleine didn't let this stop her. She had faced doubters her whole life. She knew how to handle criticism. She stayed focused on her goal: to make the world better for women everywhere. Madeleine also understood that empowering women wasn't just about women. It was about everyone. She believed that when women had opportunities, societies became stronger, economies grew, communities became healthier. She used this argument to convince even those who didn't see women's rights as a priority. One of her favorite stories to tell was about her granddaughter. Madeleine once asked her granddaughter what she wanted to be when she grew up. Her granddaughter replied, "I want to be Secretary of State." Madeleine smiled and said, "That job's already been done by a woman, so you'll have to choose something else." This story showed how far the world had come. For her granddaughter, the idea of a woman in the highest positions of power wasn't unusual. It was normal. This was the world Madeleine had dreamed of creating. A world where girls could dream big without limits. A world where women had the same opportunities as men. A world where equality was no longer a fight, but a fact. Looking back on her life, Madeleine was proud of what she had achieved. But she also knew there was still more work to do. She believed that every generation needed to continue the fight for justice and equality. She often said, "There's no resting in this work. We must keep going." Madeleine Albright's legacy is clear. She was more than a leader. She was a mentor, a role model, and a champion for women everywhere. Her courage and determination changed the world. Her voice inspired a generation. And her story reminds us all that no dream is too big. No challenge is too hard. With courage, hard work, and a little help from others, anything is possible. Chapter 11. A Legacy of Wisdom. Lessons from a Lifetime of Service. When Madeleine Albright left her role as Secretary of State in 2001, her work was far from over. Retirement was not an option for her. Instead, she began a new chapter. She became a teacher, a writer, and a speaker. She continued to inspire people around the world with her wisdom and her incredible story. Madeleine believed deeply in the power of sharing knowledge. She wanted others to learn from her experiences, both her successes and her failures. She often said, "If my story helps even one person believe in themselves, then it's worth sharing." One of Madeleine's first projects after leaving office was writing her memoir, Madam's Secretary. In this book, she told the story of her life. She wrote about her childhood as a refugee, her struggles as a working mother, and her rise to the highest levels of government. The book was honest and full of lessons. It showed readers that no matter where you start, you can achieve great things if you work hard and stay determined. The book became a bestseller. People from all over the world were inspired by her journey. They saw a woman who had faced incredible challenges and never given up. Readers wrote to her, saying her words gave them hope and courage. For Madeleine, this was the greatest reward. Teaching was another passion of Madeleine's. She became a professor at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. There, she taught students about diplomacy, international relations, and leadership. She loved the energy of the classroom. She enjoyed answering questions, debating ideas, and hearing different perspectives. Teaching allowed her to share her knowledge with the next generation of leaders.